I'm Charles Galda, President of Vision New England, and your host for the Church in Action. This week, we're talking with Dr. Paul Hoffman about his newest book called AI Shepherds and Electric Sheep. It's written in collaboration with Dr. Sean O'Callahan. Paul is the senior pastor at Evangelical Friends Church of Newport, Rhode Island. He's a professor at Seminary Now and is the co-author of Preaching to a Divided Nation, who you might remember being on the Church in Action back then. Paul, thanks for being with us again.
It's great to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks. And maybe just for folks who may not remember that last episode or maybe missed it, could you give us a little bit about bio on your background and where you're from and how you wound up pastoring in Newport?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I am quite a bit of a New Englander, maybe a lot of a New Englander. I was born in Burlington, moved to Maine when I was 6 years old, and pretty much raised in Maine. So I consider myself a maniac. And then went on to college, where I went to Gordon College and then attended seminary at Gordon Conwell. And then after that, the Lord opened the door for my wife and I to move to Denver, where we were church planners. And from there, the Lord opened the door for us to come back to New England, where now I have served, coming up on 18 years. It'll be 18 years on February 21st. I've been the senior pastor of Evangelical Friends Church of Newport, on the Newport-Middletown, Rhode Island line.
And it strikes me, and I've been thinking about this more and more, that the average pastor tenure, they always talk about being 4 years. And so 18 years is a real accomplishment, but it's so impressive me. There's so many pastors in our network who are way more than 4 years. Mm-hmm. And so that speaks to, of course, I think that speaks to how wonderfully Vision New England supports pastors. But there might be some other things going on there.
Yes, I won't disagree. God has something to do with that as well. But yeah, we love it here. Anyone that's pastored here knows it's a great place to do ministry. It's challenging, but it's also incredibly rewarding.
Amen. Amen. And so now, Paul, let's shift over to your book. And so it's due out March 18th. But folks can pre-order it now, and I got to read a release copy, and it's great, and folks should pre-order it. AI Shepherds and Digital Sheep, or Electric Sheep, sorry. And so tell us what you mean by that title.
Yeah, so I have to confess, first off, that title was not my title or Sean's title. We went back and forth with the publisher, which is Baker Academic, and so they came up with the title. And I think, first off, there's a bit of a, how do we want to put this? It's a reference, I guess I would say, to a Philip Dick novel for those that like, technology-related novels. And so Philip Dick has a novel or a book called Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? And it went on to become what we know as the Blade Runner movie, and then later on also I think it's Blade Runner 2049 or something like that. And so there's a bit of a reference to Philip Dick's novel. That's the first layer of it. The second layer, I guess we could say, is there's a bit of a provocative question in the title, in the sense that, are we going to cede our authority? Are we going to give the responsibility, the call of ministry, of preaching the gospel and caring for souls, to machines, to silicone-based machines, to artificial intelligence? So that's, I think, technically there is no question in the title, but I think the title is provocative in that sense, trying to stir the pot and get us to think, is this something that we're just going to give over to machines like many other things that we've given over to machines? But just to be clear, that the subheading is Leading and Teaching in the Age of Artificial Intelligence. And so the first audience, I would say, is for those who are in ministry or doing work in the non-for-profit space, and of course, students, professors and students of theological education or Christian education.
Now, who knew that they had named the book in a way that you'll be selling the movie rights at some point? That's great. Blade Runner 2037.
Yeah, maybe we'll see.
And maybe we should step back a little bit, because we were talking before we started about there's been AI stuff that is a form of AI, if we can call it that, that's been around with us for quite a while, but it's been changing shape and form and power and stuff like that. How do you define artificial intelligence?
Well, oh my gosh, I wish there was a simple definition there. It depends on who you ask. And not to blow our cover in the book, we actually have in the back a number of definitions that we put in there from different experts. So I'll let people look at that. But me and Sean, my co-author, would see it as a tool that can be used to hinder or advance human flourishing. Now, that's a very simplistic definition, but we choose to see it as a tool rather as this potential partner that could take over many domains of our lives. So to us, it's something to be used to advance God's redemptive purposes in the world. Now, beyond that, those that nerd out and geek out on, computer systems, computer science, there's more elaborate definitions, and we include these in the book, including what the European Union has been doing, because they've been doing a lot of good work on studying artificial intelligence and thinking about ways to use it wisely and also ways to regulate it.
And so I'm a former technology guy. That's where I spent most of my career. And so I just think of it as it's just really fast algorithms.
Yeah.
With a whole lot more input than I could have ever imagined when I started my career. That it enables it then to do predictive word association.
Yep.
Is that kind of fair enough conceptually at a simplistic level?
Yes. It includes algorithms. It's obviously pretty advanced code. And the ways it's being used is, to me, I'm a practical theologian. So, I have a PhD from the University of Manchester. For me, I'm more of the practical theologian and ethicist. So, if people come to the book and want me to totally nerd out or Sean to nerd out on, we do give definitions to algorithms and, different parts or different components of AI. But we're more interested in not just what it is, but how is it being used and how should it be used. I will say Sean is more of an expert as it relates to the intersection of humans and machines. He's an expert in what's called transhumanism, which is just that, the intersection of human beings and machines. And so he, until recently, was running the PhD program at Salve Regina University in Newport. So he's read a lot of theses and advised a lot of PhD candidates around this topic and how should AI be used in military purposes and so forth and so on. But yeah, we do give a number of definitions because, to be honest with you, Charles, not to get too deep in the weeds on it, but there's a lot of different ways of thinking about AI. There's the way of thinking it as bits of code. There's also a way of thinking about it as an expression of economics or capitalism. And there's a great scholar that we interact with in the book named Kate Crawford, who wrote a fantastic book called Atlas of AI. And she talks about AI. There's a side of AI that's a system of extraction, because to produce these machines, it takes tremendous amount of resources. And so we're hoping AI will help us save the planet or, reduce carbon emissions. But at the same time, it takes a tremendous amount of electricity and power and bandwidth to run these programs. So there are concerns that it will fall into the hands of only elites that will take charge of this technology and then use it to further their aims. And so it's not meant to be a class warfare thing. It's just meant to acknowledge that right now the people developing this are people that have access to tremendous resources in terms of power and infrastructure and so on.
And there's certainly, I think, some of those things that I think about. Well, let me back up even more. I think one of the things I really appreciate the book is it was so practical. And so we're going to get into some of the impractical things at times. The book itself is very practical.
Yeah.
And so I do think about some of those issues that you're talking about are the same things I think we've been hearing since the 1950s and maybe before that, about how computers are going to take over the world, everybody's job goes away. And part of that, it just seems, is we can envision things that it will do and replace. We can't figure out all those new things that's going to open up to doors for jobs for people to do and stuff like that. And so, but it does seem to me there is a very legitimate, some ethical questions for sure. And then you raised some of those, is that our enemies will not be shy about using artificial intelligence as part of their military operations. And we already are seeing stuff where in other countries, they're willing to let AI make a decision about when to strike and when to kill. And our military won't allow that yet, which means we'll be moving slower than they will. But we have an ethical issue of just letting a machine decide to kill somebody.
Yeah, and that's a big, to be honest with you, I'm a couple miles from the U.S. Naval War College. And so a number of people in my church are active duty military. In fact, quite a few. Our churches had success at ministering to active duty military. And at the U.S. Naval War College, I mean, they're studying this. They're writing papers about it. They are concerned about, weapons that are going to be deployed using AI. And it's of tremendous concern. And of course, it's already being used right now and drones and drone warfare and these kinds of things. So it's going to create a whole host of, and probably, I should say already is, creating a host of ethical concerns. Because who do you blame if, quote unquote, AI is the one that makes the decision about bombing a village or deploys a nuclear warhead? Who is actually ultimately responsible for that. And we talk about that in the book. We talk about theologically that God has given human beings agency, that we're to have authority, we're to have the power of choice, that we are God's, we could say, co-creators or sub-creators. Only God is the true creator who created ex nihilo, spoke everything into being out of nothing. But at the same time, God calls us to take what he has created and to use it in a way that would glorify him and advance the flourishing of other human beings. And so in the book, we actually try and create a bit of a theological framework or a theological lens through which to think about AI and what are the best ways from a biblical perspective that AI could be deployed, and what are other ways it should not be deployed or not be used.
And that's where you start to really focus on some of the practical things, especially in a church setting too. And so I think about this stuff that it really has the power to change my level of productivity. But it does it by disintermediating me from other people. So I keep thinking about this scenario where, and I don't know how the security of this could work, that we'd get comfortable with it, but the idea that I turn it on and it listens to me all day. And now when people have questions for me, that could be something we talked about last week and they're not recalling, they reach out to me and I never get the question, but AI was in on that conversation and responds. But I can also see the one that does that predictive analytics of, I've never had the conversation, but it's listened to me enough to know what my answer would be, and it predicts my answer. And again, I'm disintermediated from that conversation in a way that makes me more efficient. But when you translate that, there can be stuff in the corporate world, if I go back to my old life, the corporate world, where that actually could be pretty useful. There's other things I think about, though, if I put into a church setting, where that disintermediation is actually very unhelpful. And could be destructive even. And so how should we think about that? Is that a silly scenario for me to think about, or how do you think about it?
Yeah. So no, I think you're raising a lot of valid concerns. In our case, we prayed about, we wrestled, we dialogued about how do we create a theological lens. And so what we call the research question of the book is, how might artificial intelligence help or hinder human flourishing? So for us, we created a model that we want to think about what we call a creational narrative of Scripture, that God created everything. And then in the end, we have a new creation, a new heavens coming down to a new earth. And in the end, Jesus Christ not only came to save souls, he certainly did that, but he also came to restore and to renew all things, because at the end of Scripture, Revelation chapters 21 and 22, we have a new heavens coming down to a new earth, and it's fully material, fully bodily. It's not pie in the sky. It's not little, the joke I like to make is Renaissance art, right? We have angels or little naked babies flying around shooting arrows at people like Cupid. That's not our future. Our future in the new creation is a wholly material future. Now, we find our purpose and how AI and really all technology should be used back in Genesis chapters 1 and 2, where we see this idea of what theologians call, using the Latin phrase, because they like to not use English apparently, but the imago Dei, which is the image of God. And so we in our book define flourishing as being in the image of God, or later on the New Testament calls it the imago Christi, or the image of Christ. And so in the end, Charles, when we talk about these things, we need to take a step back and say, how is this function of AI making me more into the image of God or the image of Christ? And especially given that the image of God has been marred because of the fall. If we had just Genesis 1-2, everything would be peachy keen. But when we get to Genesis 3, right, Adam and Eve rebel against God, sin and death, and evil, all these things come into the world. We get God's curse that now creation will be, subject to suffering and toil. And so the question is AI going to help us become more in the image of God, or is it going to accelerate the decay that was already introduced at the fall? Is it going to increase total depravity? Is it going to increase original sin in a way, or advance these things? And so that's a big question. And we wanted to write the book to help people think through, how is this technology helping human beings flourish? How is this technology advancing the redemption that God desires to bring about through his kingdom?
Well,
so, yeah.
I think that's a really big, important question. I do start at that from the perspective of almost every technological innovation we have ever had has yielded some really positive fruit from a spiritual perspective or human flourishing perspective, and been completely distorted for evil purposes at the same time.
Right.
Is that a fair observation?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, we present in the back of the book, I think it's 6 different views of technology, because there are people that take a very negative view of technology, that a lot of technology is bad, especially things relating to computers and internet have such capacity to bring good, but also to bring evil. And then there's others that are just, hey, let's merge with all forms of technology. But the position we try and take is more of a mediating view, or what we call selective engagement, where we say we don't just wholesale use something. We go around and we say, how is this going to help human flourishing here? How is it going to help human flourishing there? And so there's times that I think technology does help with human flourishing. For example, in the book, we talk about how now AI can be used to better organize and store medical imaging. So people that are getting tests done, and different doctors and specialists are looking at this technology, AI can start to look and review the imaging and maybe make recommendations or help pick up something that a trained doctor will not see, or a specialist. It can help organize it on times and dates, because that's one area that there can be a lot of information that's hard to organize. So that's a good thing. But on the other hand, it can be used to surveil people. Will other governments use AI to surveil people against their wishes or against their will? And we even use the example in the book that there's, I think it's a grocery store in New York City that is now using AI to surveil people when they come in, to try and find and see if people are shoplifting. And so, they have a note out front, but that is very problematic for a lot of people. It's one thing to have a camera watch you with a human behind it, but it's another thing to have AI watch you. And then the question is the AI going to discriminate against people based on skin color, or, if they're wearing a ball cap?
And the Chinese government is certainly not shy about that without AI. And so they're absolutely going to use that to oppress people further, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so when you come at it from this flourishing perspective, you start to lay out these 4 logs that you talk about.
Yes.
There are ways that we should be thinking about how it can be used in helpful ways. And so talk a little bit more about, what do you mean by the logs, and what are the 4 logs?
Yeah. So just to clarify, what Charles is referring to is what we call in the book hearth habits. Hearth as in a fireplace. Habits. And so what we're doing is we're building off of an idea that is presented by a philosopher named Albert Borgman, who taught at the University of Montana for many, many years, and wrote a lot about technology and really analyzing technology. And he came up with this idea called the device paradigm. But one of the things he says in one of his books is he talks about one of the ways that we need to steer ourselves away from technology is through what he calls the practice of engagement. And the practice of engagement will sometimes I'm trying to think of how best to say this. He says we can use focal things and focal practices. And so he has this idea of activities that ground us in our bodies, that ground us in God's material creation, that ground us in a particular place. And so one of the things that I really appreciated about him is he brought to bear the idea that our word focus in the Latin, originally, it comes from the idea, if you look at the history of the word, the etymology, the word focus goes back to the word hearth or fireplace. Because in pre-industrial societies, the hearth or the fireplace was the center of the home. Yeah. Right? If you can't back up the oil truck, if you don't have the natural gas line, how did you heat your house? Through the fireplace, right? And that's where you cooked, and that's where you gathered at night, and that provided lights you could read as a family and pray as a family. So we're building off of someone else's idea. I just want to make clear that I'm building off of someone else. So we build out this idea of what we call hearth habits, which are practices, embodied communal practices that we encourage people to consider doing if they're not already doing them, because I imagine some readers might already be doing these practices, but they're practices for people to consider that will keep them connected to community and keep them connected to place and keep them connected to God's material creation. So the first one we mentioned is what we call embodied habits. Okay. Embodied habits that keep you and I in a world where we're tempted. There's TV screen, our phone, our iPhone or Android's buzzing, right? And, we have all this technology going off around us. And so we posed this idea of embodied habits that keep us focused in the moment. So, for example, one of them is cooking. How often do we really sit down now and cook chicken noodle soup or a pot of chili? Or, my wife makes amazing chicken marsala. And these things take time, right? You got to cook the chicken, got to cut the mushrooms.
Wrap, yep.
Yeah, and it takes time. And so these are things you can do together with your spouse or your children or a friend or a loved one. And it's very communal. Cooking together is an activity.
So in-person activities with other human beings.
Yes.
So which is community, to your point. That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
Right?
So cooking in person, nature walking. My wife and I love walking the beach. It's called Second Beach or Satchewist Point. It's in Middletown, Rhode Island. It just takes us right into the present, away from the anxieties and stressors. And we're just watching the wind and the waves and the light glisten on the waves. And it just takes us back into the present. We're not worried about the past. We're not worried about the future. We're present with God and with one another. We add in birding, right? John Stott has a great book on birding. I don't know if you've ever been birding.
I've not. I've seen birds, but let's jump to the next one because I want to make sure we get to all four of them. So what's the next one?
Yeah. So the next one that we have is what we call place habits. And so this is from a theologian called Craig Bartholomew. And I think he recommends, I want to make sure I get this right, gardening and homemaking. And the idea of place habits are rooting us where we live, right? Because there's different plants that grow even between where you live in New Hampshire and where I live in Southern Rhode Island. Okay. And so, whether it's tomato plants or flowers, gardening, it's all about the soil. There's different soils and where do I place my garden? So it's facing south. And then homemaking is decorating your house in a way that feels warm and inviting for other people. It's a place of flourishing. So that's the second one. It's about arranging place and cultivating place. The third one are time-bound habits. And so part of the idea here is around Andy Crouch, who's written a number of good books, including the TechWise family. And so there he talks about the idea of taking digital Sabbaths, doing digital fasts, or one day a week he'll just unplug. And I think I think one day a month he does it as well, if I recall correctly. And then normally once a year for a couple weeks, they'll take a family vacation. Everybody has to unplug. Leave the phone in the car turned on. If someone needs to reach you, check it every couple hours if there's an emergency. But beyond that, just like put your iPhone away, put your Android away, put your devices away. The other thing we add to this is for those in the higher church tradition, they're already doing this, but following the liturgical calendar is a way to mark time. And so we just got through Advent in December last month, as of this recording. And so Advent is all about the arrival of Jesus Christ. It's about the incarnation, that God took on flesh and walked among us, and that God set up his tent and lived here and was fully human. And so our church practices Advent, which is the 4 Sundays before Christmas Day. And so it's the opportunity to really think, what does it mean to be fully human? And Jesus Christ has shown us what it means to be fully human. But even now, at the time of this recording, I think we're in Epiphany.
Yeah.
And so Epiphany is this time we think about the manifestation of Jesus Christ, showing Jesus's life and ministry to the world around us as we move toward Holy Week.
And so only a couple minutes left. What's the fourth one?
Yeah. Okay. The last one is social habits, the Lord's Supper and hospitality. And so social habits are more, focused on social. We take the Lord's Supper together as a community, whether the first Sunday of each month or every Sunday, depending on your church. And then hospitality is opening our homes to one another and inviting one another in.
So basically, I hear you talking about getting out of a digital world, a wired world, and connecting yourself to other people, to a physical place, to the seasons and the calendar, and things going on around us. Is that what you're trying to do?
Exactly.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Which we probably should have been doing without AI to begin with. And so the AI just makes this even harder to be disciplined about.
I think we're going to have to, because we already have fridges that have AI that's monitoring the milk in your fridge. Oh no, your milk is 3/4 gone. Time to tell Amazon to send you a new thing of milk, or whatever the case is. It's just going to become increasingly ubiquitous and intrusive. And so I think we have to have what a friend of mine who wrote the foreword to the book, Trevor Sutton, said, counter-forming habits.
Because it's not, I think about just, I hate to apply the word addicted to it for many of us, but it really is that if it's sitting there, it's almost impossible for us to just not look at it and see what's going on. And we were away with some friends earlier this year, and not by design. I just left my devices in one house. We had 2 houses because there were so many of us. I left our device in one house and spent the whole day without it. And there was a sense of liberation that I wouldn't say I'm certainly not the most addicted person to my phone. And I don't do social media. I can't stand it. And yet I'm always checking my phone because there's work stuff to do. And it was liberating, just sit there and at times not do anything because I didn't have it with me. That I think is what you're trying to tell us we need to do.
Yes, I think we need to do these counterformation habits to stay bodily grounded, to stay grounded in the world around us, so we're not sucked into a screen. And then in our last chapter, just to give a heads up to people, we do talk about, as it relates to ministry and Christian education, we need to think really carefully about to what extent we incorporate AI when it comes to the pulpit ministry, the teaching ministry. What are ways that are helping people grow and form into the image and likeness of Jesus, and what are ways that are maybe cheating or cutting corners, or we're not doing the work that God has called us as ministers and educators to do. We are souls that minister to souls. And
that's a good one. We're out of time, but that's a good teaser for the book. There's some really practical do's and don'ts there, where you guys have put some real thought into it that's helpful for us. Paul, thanks. The book is AI Shepherds and Electric Sheep. If you can pre-order it today on Amazon, do it. You won't want to miss it. It's really important read, because we have to figure out how AI is going to change how we minister, how we make disciples, how we raise our children, how we help raise our grandchildren. So pre-order it today. Paul, thanks for being with us. Thanks for this book, and thanks for your ministry.
You got it. Thank you so much for having me on. God's richest blessings upon Vision New England.
Thanks, and the same to you. Same to you. To support this program and accelerate evangelism, go to visionnewengland.org and click on Donate, or click Member to become a partner with us. This program is supported by the Palau Association, who are dedicated to proclaiming the good news, uniting the church, and impacting cities worldwide.
At Leadership Transformations, we believe that when you have the right resources to help you slow down and experience a deep and refreshing connection to God, you can become the discerning leader you know you are created to be. Friends, Steve Macchia here, and I have a free gift for your soul. It's called Pathways. Pathways is our weekly email aimed at offering you soul-nourishing content for the journey. It contains readings, prayers, spiritual practices, a link to the Discerning Leader podcast, as well as information about all of our upcoming soul care retreats, workshops, and online offerings. So head on over to leadershiptransformations.org today and sign up for this free resource. It will help you slow down and be more. God bless you, friends.